So I wanted to continue the conversation around geospatial AI and generative AI, the ChatGPT, ChatGPT conversation. So I've looked and thought about sort of the traditional worlds that we inhabit at the moment. We've got the world of GIS, we've got the world of remote sensing, and I live in both of those worlds. But what happens in a sort of a typical engagement with a GIS department? Let's talk about that one first. Usually it's someone in an organization that asks for a map. That's the first question. So they're already asking a geospatial question. The next thing is an analyst uses, more often than not, desktop software to construct an answer to that question, to ultimately build a map. So they bring the data together, they do the analytics, and they output a map, which is the deliverable for that particular individual. When one looks at remote sensing is more often not, again, a geospatial type question. We need this LiDAR data. What happens in the background? The acquisition happens, the processing, the analytics happens, and a data product ultimately is delivered to that customer. Again, it could be a point cloud, it could be processed data, which is colored point clouds, all of the various pieces which make up a potential deliverable for remote sensing. So it's, in both cases, it starts with a geospatial question, and it involves a process where an expert delivers an output to answer that question. And I look and see where we're basically focused, and it's often departmental level. It's the GIS department is working with another specific department, an individual in a department. Similarly, in the remote sensing world, I noticed these applaudable efforts to build geospatial strategies, which is to try and take the geospatial world higher up in an organization. I always look at it and wonder how successful those efforts are. And again, I applaud them because, number one, we're talking about geospatial, which most people don't understand that word. So we have to already begin with explaining geospatial. And then at the end of the day, what is the deliverable we're talking about to those senior people? More often than not, it still sits in that mapping data world that we inhabit at the lower levels. So I think that's potentially problematic. Where AI and generative AI come into this equation is I think it cuts down a bunch of those barriers that the industry itself has faced over the years. Number one, that question that's a geospatial question. Most people don't ask geospatial questions, not inherently. They don't necessarily want a map. They want an answer that in the background we know involves geospatial data. So we want to present to folks the ability to ask a question without knowing anything about geospatial. Let me give you an example. An engineer, I've used this before, safety engineers in DOTs, that's one of the highest priorities for Department of Transportations in the US, is to cut down on serious injuries and deaths on the road. So what if a traffic engineer could ask the question of an intersection, which is where most accidents happen? Give me a score on the safety of that intersection. It's a very simple question, and it isn't inherently geospatial, at least not to the asker. How does one solve that particular problem? Well, there's a whole bunch of geospatial data that is behind that. That's 2D, 3D data, real-time data as well, to assess the safety of that intersection. So yeah, are there lots of accidents there? Yes. Is there overhanging vegetation? Yes. Is there a guardrail broken? Yes. Can we track movements of pedestrians and traffic through that intersection and see if there are problems? So the answer to the question we know is complicated, and it's all geospatial. What about if we could automate that process? This is again where AI comes in. Suppose we had the ability to automate that process. So no expert in the middle, nobody actually working through that stuff on a desktop. We have a chatbot, which is powered by an LLM, that's ChatGPT, where someone can type in a text answer. We in the background process that data through geospatial processes and the right data, and we spit out an answer. And that answer may just be a score out of 10. Doesn't necessarily need to be a map. It doesn't have to be anything else. It could just simply be a score. So I think that the whole world of generative AI and AI itself is going to lead us down that path. It's going to help us overcome some of the barriers, historical barriers that the geospatial industry have focused. It also enables us to talk at a much higher level in organizations about the value of this stuff. How much value does that bring, for example, to someone that is in charge of a DOT. If we could give your safety engineers, some of the most important people in a DOT, the ability to simply ask a question about intersections in a particular city and get scores back instantaneously, how valuable is that to your organization? That is a completely different conversation versus talking about data delivery or maps. So I'm a great believer in where we're going to in this whole world of AI and generative AI. I'm intrigued by the path that it's following, and I'm involved in lots of conversations around where this is heading to. But the future is very, very exciting, I think, and I think it's going to completely revolutionize the geospatial industry. My thoughts are what's today, Thursday. Thanks for watching.